excited about today.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, you're a Wonder Woman, so you have to be on my show.
Yes.
So I just want to start the show. We are on Facebook Live, and for those that missed this, we're going to rebroadcast and also share this later on Apple. But so for those of you that are actually new to Wonder Woman in business, including Beth, I'd like to give a little bit of a background story about Wonder Woman in business. Today we're at episode 9. I started Wonder Woman in business as an audio and video podcast, really for the purpose of inviting, true, what I believe are thought leaders in their respective industries, women that have kind of made the path for the rest of us and are willing to, give their time and share their stories and provide best practices to those that are aspiring Wonder Women. My name is Jasmine Sandler. I'm the CEO of a company called JS Media for the last 14 years. And what my company does primarily is serve women. My whole purpose in my business, which is a branding and marketing agency, is to provide opportunities for female entrepreneurs and women that are trying to make a difference in corporate, the opportunities to network with each other as well as build their brands and create a real impact. So enough about me. Again, I want to welcome Beth to the show, and I'm just going to give a little bit of a background on her. I'm halfway through her book. If I wasn't away last week, I would have finished it. It's honestly, the word I can use is awesome. I love it. I keep falling asleep.
A lot of pages in there, so I know it takes a while.
Yeah, I keep falling asleep, but not because of your book, just because by the time I get to it, it's the evening and I'm loving it, and I wake up with like drool on your book. So anyway, I love it. So Beth is going to talk a bit about her book today for sure. Imagine it forward. But I've been a fan of Beth's for a long time because my background is with IBM. Actually, GE was an old client of mine, so I kind of saw her as a trailblazer in what she's done. So I'm just going to give a little bit of her bio here and what she's doing. So Beth Comstock, former chief marketing officer and vice chair of General Electric, is now a published author, and she's going to tell us a lot more. Her mission is to understand what's next and navigate change. And you'll hear from Beth that, change has always happened in business, but now it's like at a microsecond, right? And so how do we keep up with it? And Beth really knows how to frame that conversation. So she's going to be talking about that today. Again, she spent nearly 3 decades at GE until December 2017. As vice chair of business innovation and previously CMO, she led efforts to accelerate new growth, develop digital, and what I love is the clean energy futures, and I hope we're going to talk about that today, seed new business and enhance brand value. And what I think is really interesting about you, Beth, is where you came from. She was a president of integrated media at NBC, and how she excelled in a time when it was actually, I know, because I was in business in the 80s in New York City, it's hard for women to succeed. So Beth oversaw TV ad revenue, and she's going to talk about how she helped to lead digital efforts, including the early development of Hulu, which is now just a common streaming service. So again, I don't want to overload everybody with your bio, and sure you can give us a lot more, but I'd like to start with talking about your book, because like I said, I'm still devouring it. I'd like to bring it into my book club if they're ever open to real business books. But anyway, you've had an intense career, and honestly, that your family life to me is pretty interesting because I come from a single mom, and I think that's why I do this show too. So I'd like you to talk about that, and you've had this great climb to the top, to say the least. And the word Wonder Woman is kind of slung around, and sometimes it has negative connotations, and hopefully the show is about bringing a positive light to it. So, we're expected to do it all, right? Have children, raise a family, have a career, help our husbands, all of these things. So I'd like to know how you've done it all. Like, what 3 character traits could you kind of attribute to getting here and where you're going?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this. I remember being a freshman in college. I went to the College of William and Mary in Virginia, and I remember it like yesterday. I was in my dorm with some of my female roommates and friends on the hall, and we were talking about, it was right in the middle of, what are you going to do with your life? And I remember saying, I am going to have it all. That is my God-given right. And it was this would have been 1979, probably really, very very much I expected to have it all. And there was a lot of debate with the women there, but I was like, no, I am going to have it all. So somehow that imprinted in me that very early. And so I think that was never a question. But what so I think a couple of things I've learned about myself, I am ambitious. And I'm okay with being ambitious. And I think that sometimes gets us a little confused to say you're ambitious somehow is less flattering or not, doesn't seem very like something that you want to assert. But I am ambitious. I was always ambitious. So I think that's something like just being ambitious, but ambitious in a way, not just to have a title or to have a job, ambitious to do a good job. So I think my ambition to learn. My ambition to kind of continually be a better person, so that believing in better, I think would be a second thing. Just there's constantly a way of believing in better. And then the last thing, I think there's sort of an interesting dichotomy of sort of tenacity, just keep coming back in the face of a lot of crazy things. But also I think what I had to struggle with was getting out of my own way. And, it brings up things like asking for help. As you said, I mean, I started my career, I willfully chose a path as a divorced single mother, just as my career was taking off. And honestly, I didn't ask for enough help. And so I put a lot more of that burden, but back to that belief of, 19-year-old me, I can have and do it all. I literally thought it meant you had to do everything yourself.
Yeah.
There's good and bad of those kind of aspects.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I mean, and wouldn't you say it's also understanding where to put those character traits in terms of how persistent you are and determining what path you're going to put the ambition and persistence? How do you know? Like, this is something I asked all my guests, because I find that every amazing guest that I've had on that I think is super successful, it's because they've made the right decisions with those character traits. So can you talk just personally about some ways that you have made specific decisions?
Yeah, it's interesting, Jasmine. I'm not sure I've always made the right decisions. In fact, I know I haven't, but I believe that once a decision is made, you have to work to make that path work. So again, early career, a lot of responsibility, young mother. I had no choice but to make it work. I didn't have a blueprint. It wasn't like there was some book I could read or I could go to a class and said, but I had to just make something work. I had responsibilities. And so, it's not, you're in the middle of it and you have to make it work. I found that in the course of a career, I just didn't give up on things easily. I remember a woman I worked with once saying to me, and not in a good way, I came back like, I don't know, the fifth time to bring up an idea. And she's like, you just don't give up, do you? And she wasn't being flattering me. But I just, you'd try different approaches, because sometimes you've picked a path and you feel you've got to give it your best shot. Now, that being said, sometimes those paths are wrong, or you're not the right person, or it's just the wrong time. And I think those are kind of horrible moments, but we've all had them. And I found that in the course of a number of different jobs, projects I worked on. I shared in the book different examples of things that didn't work out for me. And I think as I look back on my career, that would have been something I might have done, maybe challenge myself a bit more on that tenacity of, is it that you have to finish this, or maybe it's time to just step aside and let somebody else take it forward. And so I think that's something I could have challenged myself a bit more on, and that perhaps would have required a bit more self-reflection. Yeah.
It does require self-reflection. I'll tell you, right? Because most of my listeners and folks that are watching are entrepreneurs. And it really, I always tell them in my work, you got to stop and focus. And that takes just self-introspection, like you said. So
yeah, I built my career, as you mentioned, in marketing, and I became kind of the what's new and what's next person. My career was defined, I'm in large part because I kind of went outside while a lot of people in the company were looking inward. I went outside. I looked at the trends. I was able to translate that in. So I think that was important. But what it also meant is that I fell in love with every idea I encountered, at least for a few minutes. And I would bring stuff back, especially to the team I worked for. And at various stages, I wasn't as aware of it, and they didn't feel comfortable telling me. I remember finding out at one point that my team called me the dog from Up, meaning like I like every shiny new object. And I would just say, hey, go check this out. Isn't this cool? Amazing. And so they were struggling because I wasn't clear on my expectations on some of those. Yeah. So I think, again, you need to set up the feedback loops. You need to establish the team trust, and people need to say, wait, hold on. You give me 15 ideas. I only have the bandwidth to look at 5. Help me categorize this. And I should have been more aware of it. So I think sometimes that enthusiasm, that resilience, tenacity to keep going can burn other people out. And you have to be realistic. You can't do all of that.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. You can't. And I know as an entrepreneur, you come up with so many ideas, and it's so nice when I love that you're talking about how you open yourself up to feedback and having that feedback loop, almost looking at everything that you do from a structural standpoint. I have at least found that planning, goal setting, and structure works. So I think do
you have a formal set of feedback loops that you get with clients or people you engage?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like my best clients over time are the ones where I take the time, although it's tough, take the time to ask them and listen to what they don't like and what they do like, because really your job as a consultant anyway is if you set forth goals for a client, you need to meet them, but the goals need to be reasonable and achievable. So there's no way that you can meet them without having some sort of feedback loop. And I honestly attribute a lot of my skill sets to coming from an IBM background. I think that corporate, and most of my clients are actually senior level executive women that are now going into entrepreneurship, whether they're doing a venture like you're doing, like writing a book. I see that as an entrepreneurial new venture, right? You're building a whole new path for yourself. So they could be writing books, or they could be out there becoming speakers or doing some type of tech startup, whatever they're doing. So a lot of times I find that their success is leveraging that corporate background because it gives them those kind of elementary foundation of doing business the right way. So
yeah, and it's interesting because in corporations we have a lot of metrics and a lot of opportunity for feedback, but I would say my experience is we don't often use it, and that's been my personal experience. I wish much earlier in my career I had established more of a quote feedback practice. I remember I was up for a really big, I was actually up for, I ended up being in the chief marketing officer role, and GE did a whole big exhaustive 360. And I got some good feedback, but I got some really tough feedback. And my peers and my team was saying, you don't ask for help. You're a perfectionist. Like, we don't know why we even bother working with you because you've already figured it out. And frankly, it's not a lot of fun. I had to really address that. And I'm convinced, had I not, one, had a good advisor who was in the company who's like, here's what you got to do. You got to listen. You got to tell people you heard them, and you got to tell them you need help. And had I not done that, it was a lot of, but had I not, as opposed to, how dare you say that?
Right, getting defensive.
I would not have had the path I had because I opened myself up. I realized it's much better to collaborate. I don't have all the ideas. You need to work with others. And so I wish and as with more data, how do we all think about the kind of feedback loops? One of the questions I gravitated toward in the later in my GE career was, tell me something I don't want to hear. Tell me something that you think I will find uncomfortable, but I need to hear. And that ended up being a very powerful question for me to listen. And because people don't want to tell you the bad stuff.
No, they don't.
Even your clients, right? Even if the customer service isn't right.
No, they don't. You're right.
Listen, so bad. But if you develop a regular practice and people see that you're listening and you're acting on it. So I wish I had done that much earlier in my career.
No, that's really great advice, Beth. I mean, I think that most people don't ask. They're just too busy building their business. And most times.
Your clients, we do a simple net promoter score. Would you recommend me to a friend or client? Okay, but why? What could I do better? So I think that just that back to the curiosity that comes with that. So I think curiosity might be another thing I'd put up there. As to me was essential in kind of building out a career, and maybe I think is another way to think about your Wonderwoman, women who wonder would be also a part of being.
I love it, Beth. I might steal that from you.
Go for it.
I wouldn't steal it if I'm telling you. But no, you're right. You're right. I mean, I just think of even women I haven't had on this podcast, but are dear friends of mine that I completely look up to, who have made these crazy, great careers. And I look at some of them and I'm like, well, you know what? They just kept going, not because I'm a Scorpio. So I'm just persistent, and that's a character trait. But they were just curious. So I literally observed my friends go through the ranks of major companies just through their curiosity of, hey, you know what? Maybe this isn't the right way to develop this process, or maybe this isn't the right sales formula. You know what I mean? So yeah, I agree with you. I think that's an excellent point of advice for anyone that's listening, that you have to be curious. Because if you just accept the norm, right? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Curiosity takes you to places too where you have to invite in criticism, where some of the feedback is criticism. And things I learned in a career in innovation is often you have to invite in the people who were most critical, because there's a passion there. They want to get to a better place too. And generally out of conflict and criticism, something better comes out of it, but that's really hard to deal with that.
Yeah, you have to love that.
Well, or at least be able to tolerate it.
Yeah, can you talk about that a little bit? Conflict resolution. So talk about, how and what you have seen and done, let's say at GE, and in conflict resolution, and how what you've learned through that has helped you. Because that's kind of critical. I feel like that, if you shy away from conflict, you can't really move forward. So is there any...
I'm with you.
Is there any specific example, maybe from your book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a whole section in my book. In the book I mapped out sort of 5 categories of kind of ways to navigate change. And I called this one, it's right in the center of the book, I call it agitated inquiry, which was a highfalutin term for just dealing with conflict. But I really wanted to bring out this curiosity and questioning, the ability to have a hypothesis to question. So I grew up in NBC, which was owned by GE. I went to GE, went back to NBC, and the role you mentioned, leading integrated media. And it was fraught with conflict. I was part of sort of the what's next team. We were bringing in digital streaming and other things. Mm-hmm. And yet there was a lot of goodness in the traditional broadcast model, but there was conflict. And what I came to realize is, one, there was fear, and we became warring tribes. So it was me and the digital team against the traditional broadcast folks. And I document in the book, at one point it got so tough that one of the other warring tribes I was, sort of working with, the guy ended up being my boss, but we got in such a heated debate, he picked me up by the collar and threw me out of his office.
Wow.
And I document this because, in the context of today, it sounds, crazy. Like you wouldn't imagine it happening at work, but it was just such a heated moment. This was a very competitive person, and we lost perspective. We were against each other as opposed to fighting for the company and the competition somewhere else. And I've seen that happen so many times in companies, and I lost my perspective. I got down in the weeds. I jumped off the balcony into the mosh pit, and I was pushing it up too, and I lost perspective. And so I think sometimes in those moments of conflict, you got to find ways to get to perspective. Are we both working for a common goal? Can we have fun with this? Like this guy, I used to be friends with him. I should have said, hey, let's go grab a cup of coffee. Like, I liked this guy as a father. I knew he really cared about his family. We had something in common. We both loved our families. We had things we could talk about. We both loved the company. But we lost sight of that, and it became about who's right, who's in charge, and that happens too often in companies. And I just look back, there were a lot of things he could have and should have done, but there were things that I could have done, I think, to take a different perspective.
So what about the difference? Can you talk a little bit about the difference in conflict between women and women and men? And are there differences there? Have you seen in working situations, or do you think it's the same problems?
I don't know. I think every company culture is slightly different. In that one at NBC, it was very passive aggressive. People would say yes, and then they'd leave the room and they'd say, I'm never going to do that.
That's the worst.
At GE, it was a bit more, people would people would often everybody would say it's great and they wouldn't raise their hand and say the bad stuff. But once a decision was made, then everybody would follow suit. But I really think the best leaders I've worked with were the ones that said, okay, I want to hear from the criticism. One of the practices I loved and learned to adopt is this red team, blue team approach, where when we were launching Eco-Imagination, which was our clean tech effort, where we took the team that was kind of pro-climate change, and we said, you're going to be anti-climate change. The anti-climate change team said, you're going to be pro, go do your homework, come back in a couple weeks, and we're going to have a debate. And in the end, we agreed that climate change was happening. This would have been almost 20 years ago, and we could be part of a solution. But it required forcing people to shift that perspective. So I think good leaders do that. They make room for different voices, different perspectives. It means your job as a leader is really hard because you have to navigate that tension.
Yeah. But you bring up a really good point about innovation. I mean, obviously, you come from innovation, but that it really does take more listening than anything, right? And building a team of people, even a small team, right? It doesn't need to be a GE. It could be a small team of 5, 10 people.
It's better if it's a small team.
What's that?
It's better if it's a small team.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but I think that, that's important to note, as you're building a path, you're building a plan, to have the people around the table to make change. And it kind of ties into what you were talking about previously, is how do you know you need to make change, is to be open and talk about the issue. So yeah. I think it could be applied to any business.
It could. And another sort of section of my framework is just this make room for discovery. And it is a mode of listening, to your point, Jasmine. I mean, what I mean by that is get outside, get out in the world. You start to see patterns. I have a really simple rule of thumb. I call it going on threes. Sort of once you're out, you start observing things. First time, you make note. Wow, that's interesting. Imagine, back in the day, a decade ago, when there were a few podcasts. Did someone make note? Hey, I hear more people returning to audio. I actually keep a file in my phone of interestingness. And when I'm out around, I'll note it. And then another time I see it in another context, I'll say, is that a coincidence? I'll ask. And then third time, I just declare it's a trend. And if I'm working with a team, we got to go to work to figure out what it means. But I think that is part of our job. That's one of how you get ready for change. It's not that you're going to change things, but you're not going to be as surprised. So imagine, okay, here's a bit of an exercise for you and the folks who are online. Think back a decade ago. Mm-hmm. What were the things a decade ago that seemed really bizarre that we embrace and take as commonplace today? I don't know, Jasmine, what comes to mind when you think a decade ago to now?
Oh my God. Well, I don't know why, but I'm thinking about how funny I used to think it was that people were walking down the street and I thought they were talking to themselves on Bluetooth. And I was like, that person looks like a real fool. And now people are not talking to themselves, but they're just, and it's so normal. So that's something that I was like, that's not going to last. Right. Isn't that funny?
I mean, marijuana isn't legalization.
Oh yeah, well that's another one, yeah.
Right? I mean, getting in a car with a stranger.
Yeah. Oh my God, right?
Right? I mean, something as simple as kombucha. I mean, there are these things that I think, so that's what you're trying to do when you're getting yourself ready for change, when you're out there. What are the things you're surveying today that you want to keep an eye on? I mean, this is where, then, they reach hype cycles. Is it blockchain? Is it right,
cryptocurrency and all this. Yeah.
These things create a momentum. They have ups and downs, but it's a learning journey. And so the earlier you get to learn, and you can start to say, how is this relevant to me, my future, my company, my team?
I love it. I mean, honestly, I love that, because I just want to extrapolate on it for a second for the entrepreneurs, because the entrepreneurs get stuck in the weeds a lot of times, going down a path, trying to hit a goal. And I don't think that they are doing what you're talking about, which is, it's not, I love it. It's not rocket science to be aware and open, but I think that's the crux of the importance of growth of companies, that's going to open their eyes up to what they can innovate and how they can counterfeit it into their business model, right? So it's almost like looking at, where do I, like with my own business, I look at where do I have demand, right? And what kind of revenue pockets have I been pushing that are just dead? Like, that's my own small way of looking at my business. I don't know. But I think it's looking at that and then looking at, like you said, what's changing. I had a guy contact me last year who said, do you want to do marketing for this marijuana farm? I said, no, that's my ethics, I mean, whatever. So, but I was thinking, well, if there was something else that's emerging that I don't have a problem with, I need to keep myself open about things like you said, like Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, OTT, like all of these things, Netflix, for example. I mean, it's crazy that actors are getting, I don't even know why I know this fact, but actors are getting paid more now getting on Netflix originals than some of the Hollywood blockbusters. That's an interesting thing, right? That's happening in our world.
I remember in my days at NBC when Netflix was still shipping their DVDs in red envelopes, but their names said what they were going to be. And yet a lot of the people in the industry laughed at it, or laughed at YouTube, ha ha ha, cats playing the piano, because that's what we do. We see these things and we say, oh, that's so funny. And I think what's often at stake is we're afraid of it. It's like, oh my gosh, what if that takes off? So I think as an entrepreneur, you are so focused, you owe it to the future of your business to constantly, just take 10% of your time and pick your head up and see what's happening. Use your customers as a source. Every time you engage with a customer, say, what new trends are you seeing? What surprised you lately? What's not working the way it used to? Because your customers can help you be a sense-making machine as well.
Oh, that's a really great idea. I love that idea. Okay, so I really want to know what your kind of focus is in terms of what changes or impact are you most interested in being a part of today, or maybe you're already a part of, like any organizations or initiatives. Can you talk about what you're doing today to elicit change?
Yeah, well, I left the corporate world. I put a book out. I've been kind of retooling myself, and I promised myself I was going to take some time off to answer that question. So I'm still exploring. I think the causes I'm particularly passionate about are the environment. I'm just, I've always been that way, and I'm on the board of the National Geographic Society, but I'm setting out to do more. I've been renovating a small little rundown farm, because I just believe in connecting with nature. So there's something there. Also, as a city dweller, I believe there's just a lot of challenges in our city, especially with people who don't have homes or don't have the access they need. So I tend to support those kind of causes, and myself, I'm thinking, what more can I do?
Well, I love it because, I've been in this city since 1999, like right before the 2000, New Year's Eve. And I've seen so much change in the city, but I've also, unfortunately, me as a person I can't do anything about it in my position, but I would like to. I've seen that there's been great change, like when I like Bloomberg when he came in and he made all these great changes in terms of, all the piers and the parks and the development of nature, because nature is hugely important. But I also still see a lack of accessibility for handicapped people. It's something that's my kind of like mission, And so I think there's tremendous opportunity for positive change in urban environments that I think if we come together, we can solve some of these issues.
So the other thing I would add is I'm a big supporter of women entrepreneurs. I informally advise a number of founders and just really love to see women getting out there and giving birth to their ideas. And I think that's happening across the country. It's not just in cities. And if anything, I think this resurgence of innovation and entrepreneurship that's happening in smaller cities and towns across the U.S. is very exciting.
Oh, it is. So I got in touch with, I don't know if you know, NYC We. So it's part of the small business SBS.
I don't know. Yeah.
So I spoke with them yesterday. They're so supportive. So basically what they do is they serve 5,000. I deal with a lot of these organizations in what I do, but they serve 5,000 plus, female startups and try to help them with everything like funding and education. And in the position that I'm in, I think that that's what we need to do. We need to be able to come together and have supportive organizations. It's a time where I'm seeing massive growth in terms of female entrepreneurship. VR and in technology and agriculture.
It's exciting, but the funding sources still need to catch up. You know, women founders are still having a more difficult time getting funding, still getting, I think, kind of tougher scrutiny. But I've been really impressed with the women founders I've gotten to know. They're incredibly scrappy. They're really smart risk takers. I don't know why more smart money isn't going to more women founders.
Yeah. Is there anything that you think, like any ideas you have around that for my audience? Because a lot of them are startups.
Well, I think just build your network is always good. Go find out about these organizations like the NYC you mentioned. I mean, I think networking is key.
Yeah.
I think just work on building a really good business. I often see many founders, men or women, who are like, I have an idea, now fund me. If only it were that easy.
Yeah, I wish.
You know, people want to see actually that you have a good idea. They want to see that you have a customer. They want to see some kind of path to revenue. I mean, pre-revenue companies get funded, but it's much better if you have some revenue. We're not talking about profit right now, but I think spend time on just making sure you have a business, and then build your network, and those things start to come in together. But it's chicken and egg, right? You can only do so much with limited funds, a lot of people shoestringing, friends and family. So that's where a network, I think, can help you.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I would say, because I sit on because of the work that I've done for startups, especially social media and digital startups, I've seen smart things that some of my former clients have done is keep not just myself, but other advisors involved with the growth of their company, even if it's not a traditional VC. But like you said, Beth, somebody in your network that can kind of be a mentor or a board person or something. I don't think you're ever too young as a business to reach out to those people and get them involved.
I think that's great advice. And advisors can be formal or not formal. I mean, you don't have, you know, I prefer informal advisories where I'm not looking to take a stake in the company. I just, you know, let's talk a couple of times every few months or whatever, you know. So I think you can reach out. People want to help you, especially if they know you, they believe in your idea. So you can have a range of advisors as well.
Yeah, I have to say, so I have as part of what I do, I have a conference called Brand You, and it's on leadership and social media and branding. And I hope you'll be involved this year. So I was sitting with the New York Women's Foundation. They're an amazing resource. So what they do is they support something like 320 female startups under $1 million, and they help them with funding. So anyways, I was sitting with them. I went downtown. I met with them. And they said, you know what you need to do, Jasmine? And I'm so open to good ideas. They said, you need to put together a committee of women for you to really grow this conference. So I reached out to women that I like and trust, some my clients, some just women that I know. And so now I have this small group. I think there's 8 of us now, this little committee. And like you said, they're looking out. They want to help. And it's just so nice to have them involved. And they're benefiting, we're benefiting as a team. And it was just like a spark of an idea. It's almost like innovation to say, hey, you know what, you don't need to do it alone again. So I think that's excellent.
Really great insight.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about, I want to talk a little bit more about your book. So from your book, what kind of story can you tell what I call my aspiring Wonderwomen about sticking to your values as a woman? Because like you said, it's harder for women to get funding, but a lot of times, so the other thing about me that I didn't even tell you is that I'm the president chapter of the Hockey Players Doing Business. I've been playing hockey like my whole life. And so all of my members are men. And so, I have seen with my own eyes many times where they win business and I don't because they're men. And it's even today in 2019. So, and that's, other women come across these problems. So is there anything you can talk about in your journey, in your book, about succeeding as a woman, coming across obstacles where being a woman maybe is not in your favor?
Well, my age, the time period I've been working, there's been a lot of change, but not enough change. And I've often been asked when people who've read my book, you know, they say, I'm surprised you didn't have more women you worked with or more women who championed you. And I'm like, well, that was a reflection of the time and also the kind of industries that I was in. And I think for me, I'm a shy person. I also am an introvert. They're different. We can talk, but I reserve. I'm not I'm never going to be the life of the party. I'm not the biggest voice in the room. And so I had to learn pretty quickly. I had to get out of my own way. As part of that learning, I also came to, I remember, like, I can't change that I'm a woman. I mean, now technology is such that I could, but even, I'm a woman, and I'm not going to change that.
No way.
And so I had this kind of mid-career, this sort of awakening, like that's one of my superpowers, one of my strengths. And I had a different perspective. I also had a perspective as a quiet person. I had a different perspective as a creative person. So there came this moment. I don't say there was one defining moment. It was a series of small moments, this recognition of my voice wasn't being heard and I had to change that. There weren't enough women in here. And if I left that meeting without saying anything, then I wasn't not only serving myself well, but they weren't going to invite me and maybe not other women. So you start to be aware of your difference and own it. And realize that I was not a sports fan. I like sports, but I was not an athlete myself. And they were all talking about baseball. And I realized, like, I'm never going to know, like, the batting average of name it. A lot of other stuff. And I'm here because I have a different perspective. I'm a marketer. I live outside the world. I tolerate weird ideas and different people. How can I bring that to the table? So I think that would be the story, is just kind of own your difference and use it as a value add. And perhaps that's the marketer in me. What's your unique value proposition? And in my case, difference, I had to own that. And like, it wasn't one thing. It was a series of things.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. One of my first guests, so I'm also a singer-songwriter. It's my main passion. So one of my first guests was this opera singer. She's amazing. Natalia Music is her name. And we were kind of we just started talking about that. And she said, Jasmine, and she's very funny. And she kind of grabbed me because we were sitting together. It wasn't remote like this. And she said, you're a woman. You have to just love being a woman. And I said, you know what? You're right. Like, owning the fact that you are a woman and bringing that to the table has, there's so much inherent power in that, in terms of what we do. We're collaborative, we're social, we're nurturing, we do all of these things. We're creative in different ways. So I agree with you. I think that owning that part of you as your strength, right? So on the tail end of that, are there any women's initiatives or diversity and inclusion programs that you have been a part of, maybe, or have seen, or maybe on the board of, where you think these companies are doing a good job, and here's why?
In my time at GE, I helped seed the GE Women's Network. It grew to, the women in the company really embraced it. It grew from like a dozen of us to tens of thousands of women. And what I liked about it, and I like these roles in companies, is that they're about giving women a network. For us, it was all about giving women an opportunity to flex their leadership style in different ways, to be chapter presidents, heads of this, heads of that. And they got to be seen as a leader in a way that the traditional company structure might not have recognized it. Mm-hmm. So it was an accelerator for a number of women to then get into leadership roles. Many I could point to who are now leading public companies, leading business units, CEOs, and I know the Women's Network experience. What I didn't like about the Women's Network is there was a bit of a check the box from companies. Oh, we have a women's network, let them figure it out. You needed everybody. The men in the company needed to be held accountable too. Over time, we started to get more championship and executive champions and metrics and things that were important, but it's not enough just to say we have a network. Like, what outcome and who owns it beyond the women who are doing it? I mean, women are busy. Most women who work have other lives beyond their work life. They have families, whether it's kids or parents or pets. And like, they don't have time to be running a network, doing their job and taking care. So everybody's got to get involved in that.
Yeah, I had a client a couple of years ago, Roche Diagnostics, and the person that actually contacted me first for what I do in personal branding was a man. And he is on the leadership team for the Women's Leadership Initiative at Roche Diagnostics. And I loved it. He was so involved with everything that they did. And I saw that kind of group. And in other women's groups that I've seen, like the Financial Women's Association, I don't know if you're involved with them in New York. I've spoke at some of their things. And I've seen the men get involved. And I see the power of that. Like you said, just having other people kind of get involved and support it, because we all don't have the time.
It's the same for any diverse group. They need support.
Yeah.
For me, I always felt it was my job to kind of flood the zone in hiring more diverse candidates, bringing more women in, bringing people of color. Frankly, I should have done more to bring more people of color in. You have to ask yourself, have I done enough? You can never do enough.
Mm.
You don't have to just be a woman to be bringing in women. There are a lot, and I think out of Me Too, and a lot of the discussion culturally, I've had great conversations with men who very sincerely say, I'm committed, I'm going to make this change. And so I think that's really important.
Yeah, I do too. So a couple things, I want to just get into little bits about your book, Imagine It Forward. I really think that everybody should read it. I have a hard time reading books because I'm so busy. So if I can sit down and read this book and love it, everyone should. So what are a couple
on audio?
Yeah, no, I love audio too. But so what compelled you to write it, and where do you see the impact and the reach of this book? Because that's important, right? Because I'm sure you put your heart and soul into this thing. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, for one thing, I knew I was kind of coming to the end of my GE career. I didn't know exactly when, but I knew there were leadership changes coming, and I needed to think about what was next. And I wanted to sort of capture the learning and offer it as sharing. I used to do a class at GE every month at our training center for early to mid-career people, new managers. And I loved this session. One, they challenged me, I challenged them. But I started to see also in that it was a place where people brought their fear. They wanted to innovate. They wanted to keep pace with change, but they were afraid. And I saw it sort of at the root of this was this permission granting and giving yourself permission to take a risk, even if it was asking a question, even if it was introducing yourself to someone. And I recognized that in me, and that I had really struggled with that. And so I said, I think I can, share what I've learned. And I particularly want to target it to people who are middle of the organization, middle of a career, entrepreneurs in the broadest sense, people who are fighting for better.
Right, it is a broad.
Kind of has them stuck. So it's more of a practitioner's guide. It's not a checklist, do step 1, 2, 3, and you'll figure, I actually don't think those work. It's more of a mindset shift and simple hacks like write yourself a permission slip if you're afraid to try something. Pattern recognition. So I tried to incorporate some of those simple tactics that I had learned or picked up from others in the course of a 30-year career.
Yeah. No, but I like that you said it's a mind shift change.
Yeah, it really is.
If you're stuck, like I said, most of the people I come across are stuck somehow, whether they're just not hitting their revenue goals, or, with business owners, or they want to take this leap, which I always think is interesting, because these women, I think, are superstars. And I always say to them, like, what actually could be holding you back? You have so many strengths and so much experience, but a lot of times it's just not understanding the path. Like you said, doing simple, tactics over time, and kind of looking introspectively in terms of where you've been stuck before. So,
we don't want to talk about a fear. We don't want to talk about fear and being afraid, but
everybody has a fear.
Right? They're afraid to try something. They're afraid to ask something. How many times have I heard people, my boss will never go for that, or my investors, I don't have enough money. Those things are maybe often true, but is that really the issue, or are you afraid to try? Did you ask your boss? Did you ask your client? No, I could never do that. Well, if you didn't ask, how do you know? So give yourself permission to just ask them. And if they say no, then there's another strategy to retool it, come back again, find a different way around. So it's those kind of things that we all know. We opt out. Well,
I have on my refrigerator Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like my favorite chart ever. And it's that safety And if you look at that chart, safety is on the bottom and growth is on the top. And I look at it every day because I have fears. Everybody has fears.
Yeah.
And if you just think, well, I can't do this because then I'm not going to have the safety net, you're never going to cross the boundary. And I feel like I honestly think it's women's job to cross those boundaries for the other women that are behind them. You know what I mean? Like,
if not you, then who, right? I mean, that's
yeah. I see so, okay. So, all right. So let's talk about events that you have coming up or anything that you have coming up. Any plans?
Nothing major. I mean, I'm continuing to be out talking about my book.
Okay.
So you can find my book wherever books are sold. It's also available for audio cast. And these days I'm just kind of wandering the world. I'm just in total discovery mode right now.
What did you call it? A Wonder Woman?
A Wonder Woman and a Wonder Woman. I'm wondering and wandering.
Okay, we're going to have to come up with a new illustration for that for next week. A Wonder Woman.
Shoes, big feet going out into the world.
Okay, we'll do it. I love it. Okay, so, well, I want to thank you. I know that we're a little bit over time.
I appreciate great conversation. Thanks.
Yeah, I love this conversation. I'd love to have you on again, at some point. And I'd like to close out the show with talking about some things that we have coming up. And Beth, you are cordially invited as my guest. So on September 26th, I'm in a space called Luminary. I don't know if you're familiar with Luminary, but it's an all-women's luxury co-working space in the Flatiron / Herald Square. I don't even know what they call these neighborhoods anymore, district. So Wonder Women in Business has a meetup group, and we are hosting a cocktail and hors d'oeuvres, just networking at Luminary. So that's the evening of September 26th. And then we are planning the Brand You 2 conference for March 2020 to celebrate and appreciate the 100th year of the women's right to vote and Women's History Month, right in March 2020. So anybody that wants to get involved with that, be on the committee, it's all available on brandyouconference.com, where you will find the recording of this podcast in next week as well under the Wonder Women section. So again, I want to thank everybody, especially Beth, for taking her precious time out to be on the show today. This is Wonder Women in Business podcast episode 9. Thank you very much. Thank you, Beth. Okay, take care.
Bye.
Bye.